I'd like to help you win your fantasy league, and this starts with dominating your draft and having a plan. I'm talking a round by round strategy for who you need to be targeting, and today we're gonna do just that. And we'll begin in round 1 with the Bills wide receiver Stefon Diggs. Now, Stefon Diggs goes as the 10th overall player off the board, but of course, if we scroll up here, if you're somebody with like a top 5 pick in your draft, a top 3 pick in your draft, you're gonna be one of targeting Justin Jefferson, Jamar Chase, McCaffrey, Cooper Kupp, these types of players in that order. But if you're 6 or after, start to look at Diggs, because wide receivers generally outscore running backs in round 1, and the wide receivers are going off the board early this year. And when you take Diggs, you're getting an elite receiver. He was still number 3 amongst all wide receivers last year in yards per route run, averaging 2.87 per game. And according to reception perception, he was the number 1 wide receiver at beating both man coverage and zone coverage last year. Now, despite being the best wide receiver at getting open last year, Diggs now goes as the 5th wide receiver off the board in drafts, and you can take him as your first round pick. And it actually could have been a whole lot better for Diggs last year. Check this out. Last year, Stefon Diggs ranked just 45th amongst all receivers in catchable targets. Now, that's not Diggs' fault. That would be Josh Allen's fault, meaning that about 23%, as you can see right here, 23% of Diggs' targets weren't catchable. Now, we know Josh Allen is a great quarterback, but a lot of this has to do with this November 6th injury from last year for Josh Allen when he actually tore part of his elbow. For the final 8 games of the season, Josh Allen said, you know what, I'm just gonna play through this damn shoulder tear. The dude is tough. But we did see the offense struggle during this time, and so did Stefon Diggs. You can see right here, in 8 games with Josh Allen injured, Diggs had 16 fantasy points per game. Still solid, but nowhere near the 23.5 he had in the 8 games before Josh Allen's injury. The quick math is that Diggs saw a 31% drop off in production after Josh Allen was hurt, and even last year though, he was still a basically top 5 wide receiver in fantasy. So now Josh Allen is healthy. Take Diggs in round 1, then get this next guy in round 2, and it's the monster himself, King Henry out in Tennessee. Derrick Henry, you can now get this guy instead of round 1 like the last 3 to 4 years, in round 2. And here's the living proof of that. Derrick Henry goes as the 17th player off the board in the middle of round 2, and if you're in like a PPR league, he's gonna start to fall towards the end of round 2. Now, last year, Derrick Henry was coming off of an injury from the previous year, which would be in 2021 when he fractured his foot, and there were some concerns. Now he's older, coming off of a foot injury. That's not good for a bigger bruising running back. But Derrick Henry said, hey, no worries at all. Watch this. He finished in 2022 as the 4th overall running back in fantasy scoring in half PPR leagues, and the fella set a career high in receiving production. 33 receptions was a career high, 74% more than any other season, and almost 400 receiving yards. Was actually top 10 amongst running backs last year. And it wasn't fluky either, because Henry was targeted on 31% of his routes, top 5 amongst all RBs. And this is going to continue because those targets led to a lot of production. He led all running backs with 12.1 yards per reception, and over 3 yards per route run also led all RBs. He was the most efficient receiving back last year, which is pretty surprising, and you can expect this usage to continue because the Titans secondary is still a concern, meaning they're probably going to be giving up a lot of points, having to play from behind, meaning more routes run and potential targets for Derrick Henry. PFF has the Titans secondary ranked 26th in the NFL heading into this year. Not great. Now, expect Henry to remain efficient because he's in an efficient offense that just got DeAndre Hopkins, who was efficient last year, and now Henry doesn't have any competition with just a 3rd-round rookie added. He led the league in carries last year. Expect him to see another 350 plus total touches, including his receptions this year. So we got a wide receiver, we got a running back. Now let's target this quarterback in round 3, and that'll be the Eagles quarterback Jalen Hurts, who was the number 1 quarterback in fantasy football points per game last year. And look, this dude just has the cheat codes, and the quarterback cheat codes for fantasy are red zone carries and overall rushing production. And we know Hurts has these cheat codes. He led every single quarterback last year in red zone carries with 43, nearly 3 per game. And if you scroll a little bit more, you can see his rushing yards per game. He was 3rd with over 50 per game. And as you can see here, Hurts goes as the 24th overall player off the board. So usually the end of round 2, he's often falling though into round 3 in a lot of these drafts, especially for playing in like a half point or a PPR league where quarterback scoring isn't as important compared to some other positions. And in round 3, this dude is a stud. Now let's look at a couple of things. This tweet was from the Super Bowl last year from Ed Warner as it was happening. Jalen Hurts, after he got a QB sneak in that game, had completed 30 of 33 QB sneaks of 1 yard this year. A lot of those were in the red zone, which led to his league high 13 rushing touchdowns as well, which means he has another whole cheat code of when they're in the red zone on that 1 yard line, he's probably banking it in. Now, like we said, Hurts was the top quarterback last year despite not even being used in the 4th quarter. Just check out this tweet from Hayden Winks. Jalen Hurts completed just 2.67 passes per game in the 4th quarter last year because the Eagles were blowing out so many teams, and he was still the best fantasy quarterback in 2022, only throwing less than 3 passes per game in that quarter. Now, the Eagles have a more difficult schedule this year, just naturally facing more first place teams from last year, so expect him to throw a little bit more in the 4th quarter compared to last last year. So even if his rushing production drops, he'll now have that passing usage to make up for it. And that passing production is going to be pretty good in this efficient offense. They have an insanely efficient wide receiver core with A.J. Brown and Devonta Smith, a tight end as well. And look at this. Last year, Hurts, he was the 3rd overall quarterback in efficiency when passing. The year before, he was like not even in the top 25. A massive leap expected to continue. Okay, now we head into round 4 where you could do one of two things. The primary goal in round 4 will be to land Joe Mixon, getting the 2nd running back on your squad from the Cincinnati Bengals. Mixon currently goes in round 4 as the 15th running back off the board, and in some drafts I see him fall to like the 17th or 18th into the late round 4. Now there's no doubt about it that Mixon wasn't all that great in real life last year. As you can see here, he ranks 61st amongst all running backs in yards per carry, true yards per carry on the ground, just 3.7. 61st out of 32 teams. He was pretty damn bad in terms of efficiency. But we need to dive a little bit deeper here because pretty quietly, Mixon injured his ankle in week 3 last year. And you can see that right here. He had an ankle sprain in week 3. This is normally a 2 to 3 week recovery. He missed exactly 0 games played through it, so it never healed 100%. And he's admitted that this lingered throughout the entire season. And this is a tip in fantasy that not a lot of people realize, is that players are dealing with injuries and some are more major than others, like Justin Herbert with his rib cartilage fracture last year and running backs playing with ankle sprains. So maybe that's one reason for his drop in production, but his overall role was fantastic. He ranks 2nd in terms of fantasy football in expected fantasy points. Based on his usage, he was expected to score the 2nd most points in fantasy. And here's some more encouraging news. He saw career highs in his receiving usage, 60 receptions and over 400 receiving yards, basically top 5 in both these categories amongst running backs last year. Again, career highs for Mixon. And now his reliable backup Samaje Perine is gone, and this should only lead to even more receiving game work for Mixon for 2 reasons. First off, Perine was highly used in the receiving game last year. He had 51 targets. That was top 20 as a backup running back amongst all RBs last year. And the second reason is there was no true reliable player brought in to take Samaje Perine's role. I mean, they re-signed Travion Williams, but he's been injured like all 3 years of his career, including right now in camp. Chris Evans will probably be the backup here, but he's kind of just a way less reliable piece or version of a Samaje Perine. And then there's late 5th round pick Chase Brown, who honestly is pretty exciting. He was really good in terms of his explosiveness. He was productive, a good athlete in college. He struggled in the Senior Bowl against good competition or better competition. That's a concern, but he's still a late 5th round rookie, not a proven player like Perine was. He's not going to be as trusted in those types of situations. Expect Mixon to get a lot more receiving usage. Now, as I said when I started this, you could do one of two things in this round. If Mixon is gone, start to target Deebo Samuel in round 4. And now we move to round 5, where it's one of my favorite players in the entire draft, Jerry Jeudy, who just continues to skyrocket up the rankings this offseason for the Broncos. He's currently going as the 23rd wide receiver in drafts in round 5. Heck, he might be a 4th round pick, even an early 4th round pick by the time the season starts, so scoop him up as soon as possible. And the reason why he keeps climbing is his target share, the amount of targets he'll probably see in this offense, the percentage is only going to rise because Tim Patrick has now torn his Achilles. He's going to miss the entire year. And KJ Hamler, who was going to have some sort of a role in this offense as like the wide receiver 4 or 5, well, now he is going to be taking a break because he discovered some sort of heart condition, so hopefully he gets better. But now more opportunities for Jerry Jeudy. Basically, they're replacing a proven veteran receiver in Tim Patrick, who was going to play a bigger slot role. Now they're going to replace him with a rookie in Marvin Mims, or maybe even some Marquez Callaway. Either way, these guys are not proven in the NFL. I think Marvin Mims is a really good talent. He's a great downfield option. He's not going to see the same types of targets as Jeudy would, though, so Judy's in the clear. Tim Patrick being out for the year helps Jeudy. So here's what you need to know about Jeudy. He was actually top 20 in expected fantasy points last year, but he struggled because Russell Wilson had a down year. The offensive line was terrible, and Nathaniel Hackett was not a great coach. I mean, Hackett was such a bad coach last year that Sean Payton has literally come out publicly and slandered this man's name, and then now there's a whole thing going on with Aaron Rodgers and Hackett, and all of this is getting back and forth shade. These teams play week 5. Keep that in mind. It should be fun. Now, as I mentioned earlier, a lot of people just forget that players are dealing with injuries, and maybe that's why they stunk for a little while. This happened to Jeudy last year. For the first half of the season, he dealt with 4 different injuries. It started in the preseason with a groin, then he had a sternum, and then he had a couple of different ankle sprains, which is pretty damn impactful for a receiver trying to cut off of that. But once Jeudy was finally healthy over his final 8 games, he averaged 18.3 fantasy points and was a top 12 wide receiver during this time. Now, as a reminder, he currently goes as the wide receiver 23 in drafts. You're getting some dang good value here because this was with a terrible offensive situation last year, was still able to be a top 12 receiver down the stretch. Because now we have Jerry Jeudy coming off of career high efficiency and now paired up with offensive guru Sean Payton. And Payton's offenses historically are known to play at a faster pace and put their playmakers in advantageous positions. Right now, the expectation is that Courtland Sutton's going to play a lot in the slot as a bigger slot receiver at times, like a Marquez Colston in the past with Sean Payton, and Jerry Jeudy should be seeing the Michael Thomas role, people. So target Jeudy in round 5, and then look at this next receiver who's fallen to round 6. At some points this offseason, Christian Watson was taken as a 5th round pick, but now he's falling to round 6 because look, there are some actual concerns here. Aaron Rodgers is gone. Watson topped 4 catches in a game just twice last year, and he had 2 long rushing touchdowns to boost his production. Now, Watson is another receiver like Jeudy who dealt with a lot of injuries last year. I mean, he had 5 different injuries he was dealing with as a rookie, and it started in the preseason where he actually had in June during OTAs, he had to have a minor surgery here, so he didn't get any of his reps. He started the season off in week 2 with a hamstring strain that he re-injured in week 5, and it wasn't until all the way out here after a week 8 concussion, wasn't until week 10 when he finally got to pop off. Because in week 10, his first healthy game of full snaps since the first week of the year, he ended up putting up 32 fantasy points. He had 3 touchdowns and over 100 yards against the Cowboys. This was his coming out, his breakout party. And then for the rest of the season, his final 8 games from that point on, he was the wide receiver 7 in fantasy, right around Amon-Ra St. Brown and AJ Brown and Tyreek Hill and Stefon Diggs, these guys who all go in round 1 and 2 of drafts. Well, Christian Watson is going in round 6. And a big reason for this is the market thinks his new quarterback Jordan Love is bad, but here's the deal. Aaron Rodgers, his quarterback last year, was bad. Rodgers ranked 35th in quarterback accuracy and efficiency last year. If Jordan Love can just do this or a little bit better, you're going to see a similar production year out of Watson. Now, another knock I hear a lot is this rushing production right here. He had 7 rushing attempts last year, Christian Watson, basically like 1 per start he had. This led to 80 yards and 2 touchdowns. People are saying he's not going to see this production this year. Now, it is true. Maybe he doesn't see a 46-yard rushing touchdown this year, but he's still going to see 1 to 2 carries per game because it's a big part of the Packers offense. And if he's generating 120 to 150 rushing yards, that's kind of the equivalent to 2 or 3 more touchdowns for fantasy. It is a sneaky good bonus. So target Watson in round 6 and then grab Deontay Johnson in round 7. Johnson has top 10 upside for the Steelers. Now, despite this maybe bold stance you think I have of him having top 10 upside for the Steelers, he goes as the 34th wide receiver off the board in round 7. Here's what you need to know. Deontay was top 10 at earning targets last year, ahead of Jamar Chase and AJ Brown. But the problem was he was the unluckiest receiver in the league. He scored 0 touchdowns despite having 147 targets last year. But based off his volume, the usage he was seeing, those targets, he was expected to score 7 touchdowns. And if he would have just seen his expected points off those touchdowns, he would have actually finished as the 16th wide receiver in fantasy. But now, because of this unluckiness last year, he's being massively undervalued, like we said, as the wide receiver 34. He should be getting taken as a top 20 guy, no doubt about it. And it wasn't just Deontay who struggled with touchdowns on this team, because the Steelers ranked last year. This is a ranking order right here. They're dead last behind the Jets, Titans, Panthers, Rams, all these teams in passing touchdowns. They had just 12 total through 17 games last year. So target Deontay in round 7. If he's gone, look for Marquise Hollywood Brown. And before we get to the round 8 and beyond players you need to target, make sure you hit the subscribe button so you can stay ahead of all your buddies this year with this type of content. Okay, now we get to round 8 and we're targeting the new Lions running back, David Montgomery. Montgomery somehow goes as the running back 30 off the board. He's at borderline top 20 running back for me this season, and here's why. The fella signed a significant contract with the Lions. It is a 3-year deal worth $18 million, and check this out, $11 million guaranteed, the second highest paid running back from this offseason's free agency behind only Miles Sanders. And Dan Campbell and the Lions are already pretty damn hyped to use him. As you can see here, he's talking about having a 2-headed monster with Montgomery and their new rookie Jahmyr Gibbs, so this is good that he's already being involved even though Gibbs was taken with a high draft pick. And more importantly, as Brandon points out here, Dan Campbell in this quote, if you were to read these quotes, basically says he wants to give David Montgomery a ton of touches, potentially 20 to 25. We know that's not going to happen, but a lot of touches, and then mix in Jahmyr Gibbs as sort of this change of pace pass catcher. And now for a lot of people, that is the concern, that Jahmyr Gibbs, the first round pick, is going to be too involved. Of course, a first round pick, a top 12 pick, will be involved. You can see here, Gibbs is a fantastic prospect. His speed score is elite according to Player Profiler. His yards per carry in college, well above 5, which is good. And his target share is the big one. He's an elite pass catcher. Nearly 15% of his team's targets he earned in college. That is 93rd percentile, top 7% of all time, that means. But all the quotes out of camp seem like Montgomery might actually be the guy who's going to see 60% of the carries in this backfield, and he'll definitely see the red zone work because he's almost 25 pounds bigger than Jahmyr Gibbs. And last year in this same role, the red zone role, Jamal Williams saw 45 attempts inside the 10-yard line, 55% more than any other running back, but that's not all. Because as Alex Caruso points out here on Twitter, the Lions actually led the NFL last year with 90 red zone rushing attempts, and Jahmyr Gibbs in college only ever saw 35% of his team's carries. Now that 90 might drop this year, but even if it's 70 or 80, David Montgomery is going to see the bulk of those. But as I said, he's probably going to see more than just the red zone work, because look at this, as Hayden Winks said. The Lions averaged 30 running back touches per game last year. By the way, that's the most out of any team. And Jahmyr Gibbs only ever had 16 per game in college, leaving leaving about 14 per game left over based on last year's number for David Montgomery. The best middle round running back pick this year in like round 8 or 9 in that range of drafts is David Montgomery. Now in round 9, you can go one of two ways, and the ideal way to go is the Titans wide receiver Trelun Burks, who's now fallen down draft boards after Hopkins signed here. Burks is currently going now in late round 8 or in round 9 as the wide receiver 40 off the board. He's dropped about a round and a half since Hopkins signed, and this is just way too much, but it's giving us a nice value. So Burks was a rookie last year, but if you remember in college, he was used in not the most traditional role. He was used often in the screen game or the slot, and he didn't have as much experience operating on the outside. So that may explain his early season struggles and the fact that he was also just a rookie. And oh yeah, his early season struggles can maybe also be explained by an October 2nd turf toe injury. If anybody has ever had turf toe or had somebody or known somebody who's had turf toe, this thing can linger for months. Now, despite dealing with this injury and kind of learning how to play the outside wide receiver role in the pros, not in college, in the pros learning how to play that role, he was still 35th amongst all receivers, not just rookies, all receivers at winning against man coverage. And a big reason for this is he can leverage his unique size and speed. His speed score 86th percentile for his size is great because his size 6'2" and 224 pounds, one of the bigger monster wide receivers, think like a DK Metcalf size speed specimen. That's where Trelun Burks is trending. Now, of course, the big concern is that DeAndre Hopkins signed here. It's a pretty decent size deal, 2 years and $26 million, potentially up to $32 million. He'll be the wide receiver 1, which a lot of people are running away from Burks now. And look, there's no doubt about it that Hopkins, even though he's 30 plus years old, he still got the juice. This dude was number 2 at beating man coverage last year, averaging almost 11 targets per game. But the good news is that Hopkins is just going to make this team more efficient, which means more red zone drives and more potential red zone targets for Burks. So even though DeAndre is going to operate as the wide receiver 1, you still have Burks, who's a younger player with an unknown potential upside. He could pop off in year 2, and Hopkins has missed 44% of his games the last 2 years. And then there's also the notion that Hopkins could take some of the defensive attention away from Trelun Burks. So get Burks. If he's not there, look at a running back, Antonio Gibson, in this round. And now we go to round 10, where Elijah Moore is a fantastic breakout option, the new Cleveland Brown. I'm pretty surprised that he's still going in round 10 as the 45th wide receiver off the board. He's going to be a top 40 wide receiver pretty dang soon. You want to get him now because everything out of camp right now is glowing reviews. As you can see here, Elijah Moore could be a bigger focus on the offense in 2023 than a lot of people expect. Basically, him and Deshaun Watson are the number 1 options in camp with Amari Cooper banged up right now. Now, if you're just hopping back into football, which is fair, yes, Elijah Moore was traded back in March around the free agency period to the Cleveland Browns. And based on everything we're seeing in camp, you can see right here, he's basically already operating Elijah Moore in the slot as a starter. And this is unbelievable news that he'll be in the slot for Deshaun Watson, and here's why. Watson's slot wide receivers averaged 12.3 points in his 5-year career. This would rank 31st amongst wide receivers last year. So 31st amongst receivers last year, and that's using some average wide receivers during that time, like a Kiki Kute was even involved in that sample. Elijah Moore is probably better than him. Elijah Moore goes 45th overall. Average slot wide receiver for Deshaun Watson finishes 31st overall. And just a reminder that Elijah Moore is probably not your average slot receiver because as a rookie, he was top 10 at beating man coverage, beating it almost 48% of the time. And that's not all. Because over his final 7 games as a rookie, he was the wide receiver 4 in fantasy. Only Deebo Samuel, Justin Jefferson, and Cooper Kupp were better. And then Elijah Moore got an injury that year. And then last year, he dealt with the old stinky Zach Wilson and contract disputes, didn't want to be there. And speaking of Zach Wilson, yes, he held down Elijah Moore because in 8 games without Wilson last year, Elijah Moore averaged 126% more fantasy points per game. Yeah, that dude with all that potential is going to now be in a more creative Kevin Stefanski offense this year. So put a star next to Elijah Moore's name in round 10 and then grab this next asset. Because if you want to win your fantasy league this year and smack around your buddies and take home a championship, this fantasy blueprint is for you. It will have all the tools and analysis you need to do just that, smack around your buddies and win. You can see here a player we just talked about, Elijah Moore. I have him as my 92nd overall player. I'm 25 spots ahead of the ADP, the average draft position, showing that he is a clear and glaring value. Now, getting the blueprint's extremely simple. You just click the link in the description below or scan the QR code on the screen and follow the 2 simple steps. I've been determined to make this the best value for you in the entire industry, so it's just $5 for the entire year. Not just for your draft, but all 17 weeks of the season up until your fantasy playoffs. And if you don't make your fantasy playoffs for some reason, well, go ahead. This is risk-free. I'll refund that $5. Now is the time to get it. So to get access to your blueprint today and join the thousands of others already using it, click the link in the description or scan the QR code on the screen. And now we move into round 11, where there's one of 2 things you can do. You can start by either targeting this running back, Tyler Algier from the Atlanta Falcons. Algier goes as the 44th running back off the board in round 11, and I get it. Yeah, Bijan Robinson is indeed there. But that doesn't mean Algier doesn't have any value as a strong handcuff with also upside even in the weeks when Bijan's active. Because last year, this dude was quietly a league winner. Over his final 4 games, he was a top 5 running back in fantasy. Only McCaffrey, Akers, Austin Eckler, and Jerick McKinnon were better than him. He averaged over 17 points per game during this time. Not bad for a 5th round rookie, and here's what he did on the entire season. He was a top 20 running back in efficiency, both on the ground and when you factor in his receiving work. His yards per touch, over 5 yards per touch, over 1,100 total yards, again as a 5th round rookie. Now this all matters because it shows that you can trust him and he'll be productive if Bijan misses time. But like I said, despite this, he's currently going in round 11 of fantasy drafts after guys like Devon Achane who are currently banged up in camp. And now here's a few recent quotes that kind of give me a little bit of concern for Bijan Robinson. Now emphasis on the little bit of concern here, but as Josh Norris points out, they were calling Bijan Robinson an offensive weapon, saying they're going to put him in the slot, use him around the field more so than just a running back in the backfield, which means more reps for Tyler Algier at the true running back position. And that's actually what we're seeing in camp right now. You can see my tweet right here. This was from a recap of all the things happening in camp every single week. I put a nice recap on Twitter and Instagram. You can check it out. But Tyler Algier is getting first team reps ahead of Bijan Robinson in camp at times because they want to still, quote, heavily involve him this year. So again, Bijan is the RB1 in this backfield, but that doesn't mean that Tyler Algier still can't see 10 carries per game in what was the number 2 rush offense last year. And if Bijan misses time, 20 plus touches are in the cards. So get Algier. If you want a wide receiver here, look at Juju Smith-Schuster. And now we go to round 12 where we have a Kansas City Chiefs wide receiver in Sky Moore, the second-year player. Moore is currently going off the board as the 54th wide receiver in drafts, even though right now he is in line to be a top 2, if not the top receiver for Patrick Mahomes. Because as his own teammate, who's a wide receiver in this offense and right now running as a starter, Justin Watson, in camp, Sky has taken a huge step. It's been an unbelievable spring to watch him and now summer, so that's good to see. Now, maybe you don't want to draft him because you were burned by taking a late round dart on him last year and he only put up 2.7 fantasy points per game. Not great, but you gotta dive into this more. Because last year, the Chiefs just paid Juju and MVS and then traded early on in the year for Kadarius Toney. There was just little opportunity for Sky Moore to get on the field, especially when you consider he was dealing with an injury. Because to start the preseason, and he missed a lot of practices during the preseason, he had a hamstring injury, meaning that he just couldn't get caught up to speed with Patrick Mahomes in the first team offense. But now all the reports are that he is operating as the starting slot receiver in camp, and this matters because, as Scott Barrett points out here, the Chiefs had the most receiving yards gained by slot receivers last year, 200 more than any other team, almost 2,000 on the year in total. And now Juju Smith-Schuster is gone, who led this team in slot receiving targets last year, and McCole Hardman, who was 3rd on the team in slot receiving targets. So Sky Moore will fill Juju Smith-Schuster's role, and Juju finished as the 35th overall receiver in drafts last year. But as we said earlier, Sky Moore doesn't go 35th overall, not even close. He goes 54th overall in drafts. And if you're not too familiar with Sky Moore's college production, let me quickly remind you. This dude was as dominant as it gets. He had almost 40% of his team's targets. You can see right here, 99th percentile is top 1% of all time. And his college dominator, how much of his overall production he produced, over 44% of that. About almost half of his team's production was just this one dude alone on offense. And now we have to point out one more thing because it is significant. You've probably heard by now that Kadarius Toney is hurt in camp, but kind of under the radar is the fact that he had a minor knee surgery to clean this thing up, and he might not even be ready for week 1. Sky Moore seems pretty significantly ahead of him in the pecking order. So target Sky Moore and then this next veteran running back in round 13. And that will be Ezekiel Elliott. Now, here's the deal. Stick with me here. At the time of this recording, Zeke is still a free agent going in round 13. And look, I'm not going to be the guy to come out here and say Zeke was great in real life last year. He wasn't. He was 62nd on the ground, even worse than Joe Mixon as a pure rusher last year, averaging just 3.7 true yards per carry. But I will at least point out the entire situation surrounding this that not a lot of people understand. And that's the fact that last year in week 7, he had a grade 2 MCL sprain. This is a pretty significant injury for a running back, an older running back especially, to try and come back and heal from. He came back pretty quick, but it affected him basically the whole rest of the year. Now, yes, he wasn't great in real life, maybe partially due to the injury, but despite this, he was still great in fantasy. Look at these finishes: 12th, 10th, 15th, 9th. You can keep scrolling: 11th, 15th, 18th, 26th. You keep going: 17th, 13th. I mean, this guy was like a top 20 running back every single week in the Cowboys system. And he has 2 key skills that allowed him to finish that highly, and he's going to bring these to his next team. He was a top 20 running back in pass protection last year, and he's still a strong red zone running back, ranking 13th in red zone usage last season. And then in round 14, finally target your tight end, and this is a great value in Tyler Higbee from the Rams. Now, if you look at what he did last year, you'll probably be impressed. He had 108 targets, top 5 amongst tight ends, and he was 5th in yards after the catch. So Higbee finished as a top 15 tight end last year, but his role actually got worse in 2022. Higbee had to block more last year due to a bad offensive line. He ranked 14th in blocking percentage. Look at this: 17% of the time he was blocking. That's like 10 to 12% more than the previous year. And when you're blocking more as a tight end, you can't run routes and earn more more targets. Now, I know what you might be thinking. Oh, Sal, Higbee only produced because Kupp was out. That's a fair thought, but it's just not correct. Because in 9 games with Kupp in, he actually earned more fantasy points, 9.2 versus 8.5 with Kupp active, and a lot more targets. He earned 7.1 targets when Kupp was active and 5.2 when he was out. And this kind of makes sense because if Kupp is out there's going to be more attention on Kupp, more opportunity for Higbee. Now, Cooper Kupp is currently dealing with a hamstring injury in camp, but he's expected to be a full go week 1. And one more thing, Higbee still has no competition outside of Cooper Kupp. I mean, you can scroll through this. Van Jefferson and Ben Skowronek are not all that, I would say, efficient, and Jefferson plays on the outside, not the same role. Tutu Atwell has just 18 career catches, and then you scroll over here, the new rookie Puka Nacua. I actually like him in deeper leagues as like a 19th or 20th round pick, but he's still a 5th round rookie. So grab Higbee in round 14. If you're somebody who wants to wait on tight end even more, look for Nico Collins here. Now, these are the top targets for every single round of your draft. Now, if you want to see the top 10 breakout running backs for this year who will help you win your leagues as well, check out this video right over here. And just a reminder to hit that subscribe button so you can be up to date on all the latest releases that will help you beat your league mates and take home a championship.